We're now ready to make our crab stitch or reverse single crochet. So we're doing it in 2 colours, but if you've never done a reverse single crochet or crab stitch before, I highly recommend doing it with 1 colour first before you add the complication of using 2 colours. So let's do that first. We're going to start with 1 colour. So as I mentioned before, I'm not going to start exactly where I finished off because it just tends to draw the eye to the spot where you're starting and finishing. So again, we're only going to be working through the back loops. So you're just holding the tail end at the back and then you're just pulling up a loop. Now we're going to go straight into making a crab stitch. We're not going to bother with a chain or anything. So the strange thing about a crab stitch or a reverse single crochet is that instead of working from right to left, you're working left to right. Or if you're left-handed, you'll be working right to left. So it does seem to be counterintuitive to start with. So it does involve quite a lot of concentration to make sure you're doing each step properly. But trust in your own neuroelasticity. You will achieve this. So we're going to insert the hook into the stitch to the right, grab the yarn, pull up a loop. Now as we're pulling up the loop, I tend to rock the hook backwards just to make sure that I'm not accidentally going to pull that live loop the loop I've just pulled up through the live loop, and then rotate the hook round the handle of the hook back round to the right. So now I've got my 2 stitches on my 2 loops on the hook, which is what I would normally have for single crochet. And then you finish off the stitch as normal, you yarn over and draw through 2, she says. So let's do that again. You're going into the next stitch to the right, back loop only, grabbing the yarn as normal, but as you're pulling the yarn through the stitch, you're tilting the hook to the back and just being careful not to pull the loop through the live loop on the hook. Rotate the hook round, and actually if you then, once your hook's facing downwards, if you pull that, elongate it, that does actually add extra texture to the stitch. Can you see here, it's more defined now. So I'm obviously over exaggerating the movement of the hook, which you might want to do to start with. Then as you get familiar with the stitch, you will find that you're still achieving the same result but with a less exaggerated hook movement. So let's go into the stitch to the right, back loop only, grab the yarn. As we're pulling it through, we're just tilting the hook to the back, then we're rotating round to the right and rotating the hook to face the bottom of the bag before yarning over and drawing through. Do that again, into the stitch, back loop only, grab the yarn, tilt the hook to the back, rotate it round to the right, rotate the hook to face the base of the bag and yarn over. So as you can see, this makes a really nice textured stitch. It's also quite rigid and not very elastic, so it adds really good stability as a border. So I really strongly suggest just getting to grips with 1 colour. So there you can see I've done it without the over exaggeration. But that's kind of what you've got to be thinking about doing as you're doing it. Otherwise, if you try and use the same mechanics that you use for a single crochet, what will happen is you'll keep accidentally pulling the yarn over directly through the live loop, which in effect creates a reverse slip stitch. And also these live loops, the loops that create this texture, they will be too tight to the fabric and won't create that distinctive crab stitch, because it is actually the loop that you pull through and the fact that you're pulling it slightly long, that is creating part of the texture for that stitch. Okay, so let's do it with two colours now. So get your two colours that you want to make the two colour crab stitch with, and put them on either side, one to the left, one to the right. Then you get the tail end of the first colour, hold it to the back of the work, insert the hook into the stitch, grab the yarn, pull up a loop. So this two coloured crab stitch uses the same principle as tapestry crochet. So if you remember, you always finish off the last step of the stitch with the next colour, and you always trap in the colour that you're not using. So it's the same for two coloured crab stitch. It just seems slightly awkward when you first get going, and you do have to actually really think carefully about each stitch you're doing, and then eventually you have to trust in your neuroplasticity, because once you practice and practice, you'll be able to just do it without really thinking. But this does seem very strange and awkward to start with, so please bear with the technique. So I've got my yarn that I've attached. I'm making sure I leave a little bit of a longer tail than that. I'm going to go straight into the next stitch to the right. Remember, crab stitch, we're working from left to right instead of right to left. And then I'm going to grab the yarn, and as we pull it through the loop, we're going to tilt the hook to the back, and then I'll rotate it round to the right and all the way to the bottom of the bag. Then we're going to switch colour. So finishing off this stitch with the new colour, with the next colour. So we're just going to yarn over and pull that through. So this isn't attached at the moment, we will sew that in later. So next step, we're going to start the next stitch with the new colour. So we're going into the next stitch, back loop only. Now, and this is the bit you've got to remember, you've got to trap in the other colour. So you're going to lay that across the top of the hook. So you've got the live loop, you've got the loop of the stitches you're working into, and then you're laying over the top the colour that you're not currently using. So now we're going to make the first step of the reverse single crochet or crab stitch. Grab the yarn, put it through the stitch of the bag, tilting the hook to the back. As I said, I'm over exaggerating this just to help you get the hang of it. Swing the hook round to the right and to the bottom. Now drop that colour, pick up the next colour to finish off the stitch. And you've automatically trapped that in there. So draw through the two stitches, and now go into the next stitch to the right. So the colour that we're trapping in has, in this instance, automatically fallen across the hook, which is handy. So we're going to start the next stitch, we're going to yarn over, we're going to pull the loop through the fabric by tilting the hook to the back, rotate the hook round to the right, rotate the hook round to the bottom to accentuate, lengthening this, the yarn over that you've just pulled through is what creates the texture in the stitch. Then we're going to drop this yarn, and we're going to finish off the stitch with the new colour. Then we're going to insert the hook into the next stitch to the right. Make sure that we're laying the colour we're not using across the back. Grab the yarn, pull it through, drop that yarn, pick up the next colour. Remember to pick it up near the ball and it minimises the tangling. Go into the next stitch, make sure I'm trapping in the other colour. Grab the yarn, pull through, twist it round, finish off with the other colour, go into the next stitch. Make sure we're trapping in the other colour. Grab the yarn, pull up. Drop that colour, pick up the next, allowing that one single twist to happen there. Just stops your yarn tangling up. So I'm now going to continue without the over exaggeration of the hook movement, which hopefully you will also be able to do once you get the hang of it. The other thing I want to mention once you get the hang of it is also that after each stitch you should give the stitch a little pull when you're finished in the colour, just because with this stitch you can sometimes get a bit of ruffling, because the gauge of this stitch makes a slightly bigger gauge than the gauge of the single crochet. If you're finding that you're getting a bit of ruffling or the stitches don't look that neat, you might need to go down a hook size if you're not able to consciously change the gauge. But most of the time I just find if you give everything a little pull when you've changed colour, that often negates the need to go down a hook size. So let me just carry on. It is not a very intuitive stitch, and it will take a bit of getting used to, remembering all the steps that you've got to do. Tightening the yarn, making sure you're catching in the other colour, but you will eventually be able to do it without too much fuss. It is not the quickest stitch in the world, but it is a very eye-catching and distinctive stitch, and in this case with the bags, I feel it's actually structurally quite important, because it helps add rigidity, especially to the base. It helps add shape to the base of the bag. So that's what it looks like from the back, and from the front it looks like that. So what I would say about the base is, as you can see here, it depends. You've got to consider, if you're making a really big bag, you've got to consider whether the base is the key feature of the bag, in which case, as you can see, the front and back of the stitch does look slightly different. So I think the front definitely looks better than the back. If you want to, you'll have to decide on the bag which side you want the stitches to fall on. So when I've made the base, to get the right side of the crab stitch facing the front of the bag, you have to attach the yarn to the wrong side of the base. So I'll show you. I'll actually rip this out and start again. So I can demonstrate here. So if you remember, with the first row of the base, we only worked into the back loop of the stitch. So for the base, we've got these stitches where we've gone through both loops, and then the first row of the round has left the last row of the base with an empty loop. So because these bags are quite small and the base isn't really the feature of the bag, I'm going to recommend getting your bag, turning it upside down, and then starting your crab stitch with the bag, with the base of the bag facing up and the bottom of the bag facing down. So I would actually recommend, maybe before you even start doing the crab stitch border on the bag, I would maybe put a stitch marker where the start of the round is. So here you can see we've got the back loop from the last row of the base, and then the jog from the start and the end of the rounds there. So I would, if I were you, just put a stitch marker in that, maybe in the last back loop of that row there, just so that, because what can happen is you're working around in a spiral and you are literally, imagine you're crocheting on the base of the bag, base of the bag, base of the bag. You keep going, and you think this is never ending, and then you realise that you're just putting a crab stitch in a spiral, and if you didn't stop you would actually end up going around the whole bag. So that's why it's actually quite important to mark the start, or where the jog is, just so that you've got a visual, a physical thing that you arrive at and think, oh, I must remember this is a jog and I need to step up with my stitch to deal with that. So let's join the yarn as before, tail end at the back, go into the back loop of that stitch, pull up a loop, start to make the first crab stitch, join the next colour, start to make the next stitch, remember to lay the other colour across the hook. The start is always quite fiddly with this colour work. Drop the other colour to the right, pick up the next colour and finish off the stitch, go into the next back loop, make sure the other colour is laying across the hook, pull up the yarn, lay that one back down to the left, pick this one up, finish off the stitch, go into the next stitch, make sure the yarn's laying over that I'm not using, pull up a loop. Right, so next stitch is a step up because we'd been working in a spiral, so we need to work into that next stitch and not carry on along here, otherwise we're on a never-ending journey of stitches. So finish off the other colour, trapping in that colour, step up to the start of the round, just make sure I'm in the right spot. Yep, make sure that colour's across, pull that colour through, drop it, pick up the next colour. So that is how you make the transition for the crab stitch at the beginning and end of that round from the base. As you can see, it's not that visible. So the other thing I'll mention about this, you just got to be a little bit careful, is especially for some reason along the base, these stitches tend to be a bit smaller. So you just got to be careful that you're not accidentally going into the same stitch twice. So don't be afraid to tilt the work, tilt the base towards you, or even if you're working on a the edge of something, don't be afraid to tilt to the back of the work towards you, just to get a better view of what's going on there. So let's just have a quick look at where I've navigated the start of the round. You can see that I've managed to crochet around there, and it's not too noticeable overall. So I've just made the last stitch. So I've made the last reverse single crochet in, or crab stitch in the last empty stitch. If you remember the first stitch, we didn't actually put a stitch in there, we just did pulled up a loop. So because these stitches really fall over to the right, you don't need to worry about that, because the stitch you've just made fills the gap where you joined the yarn but didn't make a stitch. So we're just going to sew the ends in. We're going to cut the yarn, both bits, and just leaving enough yarn to sew in the end. So we're actually just going to pull that live loop right out, just like we do sew and bind off. Now I thought I'd lost it, it was here. You get your needle, the hole's a bit small for this yarn. Come on, that's it. So all I'm actually going to do, just turn the work around the other way. I'm just going to run the yarn just through the stitches we've already made, because that's quite a dense area in there. I'm going to run that tail end through there. I have to sort that. Then I've accidentally caught, can you see, I've caught one of the tail ends in there. It doesn't look very good. It doesn't matter, you can just pull it out. So I've sewn that in one direction, and remember, catch a little leg on the other side and sew it back through a couple more. Put it through, clip it off, and then this other tail end, I've got two more tail ends, three more. This one that's popped through this side, you can just sew these in a way that just looks good. So here, I'm actually just going to roll that over to the back and just thread it through. There's lots of play. This is a good area to sew in ends because it's so tight. I mean, you could probably even do it one way and it would probably be alright, but I like to be on the safe side. And again, if you've got a really short end like this, you'll remember if you did one of my classes that you can sew, insert the needle in first and then thread it after. I need a different needle here. This is 4-ply, not double knit. The hole's not big enough. It'll do. Yeah, so just do that with the other two ends as well, and hopefully it should look something like this. So to be honest, because I was crocheting a lot of this when I was filming, so it's not perfect. I think if this was a piece that I really wanted to be absolutely perfect. It's not too bad. You can see here this maybe I probably could have done with going down a hook size, to be honest, because you can see here there's a bit of kind of ruffling going on, but overall I think that's pretty acceptable really. So I'm going to go ahead and do the very same thing along the top edge of my bag. So you can also use that crab stitch for making borders on straps as well. So you can imagine how long this took, putting 2-colour crab stitch all the way around this strap. Don't be frustrated if you need to make a few attempts at this. This is not an easy stitch, and at the end of the day, if you're really struggling with it, you can just do your crab stitch in 1 colour and not worry about 2 colours. So here I am, I finished putting the stitch around the base and the top edge of the bag, and now ready to make my cord and my tassels.